What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I am so thrilled to have singer, award-winning songwriter, former American Idol contestant, Chris Sligh, here on the channel. Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with us today.
Yeah, man, it's good to be here.
And you are in a hotel room. You said you're in, was it South Carolina?
Yep.
Oh well, so you got a big wedding that you're getting ready for.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is finally getting married. Congrats to him. And so I'm down in South Carolina and sitting in the hotel room, and here we are ready to do this interview. It's going to be great.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. We had to move time around a little bit because of different circumstances, but I appreciate it very much. And I just want to dive right in with kind of going back to the start. What got you started in music? What was that moment when it kind of clicked for you of this is what I want to do? Has it kind of always been your thing? Was it something you discovered along the way?
No, actually, I actually went to college as a pre-law major, and
Mm.
my plan was to try to play professional basketball and then eventually to go to law school. And so I played basketball in high school and college, and thought that that was sort of going to be at least for my 20s and maybe early 30s, I was going to sort of be the thing that I did.
Mm.
And then my freshman year, I had a coach that I really didn't like. And so I ended up falling in love with music my freshman year of college. And so I had taken maybe 6 months of piano lessons before that. Never had a voice lesson, never done any of that. I just wanted to write songs, to be honest. So I switched colleges and went to a school, very small Christian school called Bob Jones University, with a great music program. They have a conservatory level music program that I was able to be a part of, and ended up learning what I needed to learn, and then got kicked out with 7 credits left to graduate.
Oh no!
And yeah, for going to a Christian rock concert, so that was fun. Yeah, true story. And and so it's kind of that was. I mean, if that had not happened, I probably would have ended up doing Broadway or something like that. And so that sort of was one of the turning points of my life. Was I soon after started? That was December of 2000, and then in 2001, I started recording my first record and began writing songs and doing that whole thing, and the rest is history.
Wow. So was it Skillet that you were going to see in concert?
Oh no, it wasn't even like a rock band. It was like a Christian pop band called For Him.
Okay, wow. And they kicked you out for that.
Oh yeah.
I wish I could say it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, but sadly I've heard even crazier. That's crazy. That's crazy. You got kicked out with 7 credits left.
7 credits left to graduate. Super fun. My parents were so excited.
Oh yeah, I bet. That's just I mean, I guess it's funny now, but back then I'm sure it was just the most horrible thing. So I guess that wouldn't have been long before you tried out for American Idol. I guess because you were in your early 20s when you were on the show, right?
I was actually in my mid 20s. It was 6 years later that I tried out for American Idol. Yeah, or five and a half years later when I tried out for American Idol, and 6 years after that I was on American Idol.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I was 28, turned 29 during the show when that year.
Okay. So what were you doing right before you decided to try out for the show, and what led you to try out for American Idol at that point in your life?
Yeah, I was working as a part-time worship leader, and I was working at a company that did basically when you call an apartment complex and you think that you're talking to someone on campus at the apartment complex, you were really talking to me. Okay. And so I would sit at a computer all day, and whenever anybody would call, there would be this, screen that would pop up that would tell me all the details about this apartment complex.
Yeah.
And then I would pretend as though I were, the person who was on site at these apartment complexes. So kind of a sales position, but it wasn't really a sales position. It was more like an informational position. So anyway, I did that for a couple of years, and that was sort of what paid the bills. And then my band, the year before American Idol, I was in a band called Half Past Forever, and we had toured all over. I mean, especially the Southeast, but really all over. And the year before American Idol, we played, I think, 75 shows or something like that. And so we actually had quite a bit going on.
Right.
I auditioned for American Idol a little bit as an accident. A friend of mine at the time had a pretty successful worship website, like worship music website. And he this is pre-YouTube, like this is before YouTube had even started.
Sure.
He would put QuickTime videos up on his website of different topics and stuff. He was very early on the video train. And so at the time, he would just put these 3-minute QuickTime videos up on his website. And so he was like, hey, I want to go and get content from the American Idol experience, but I'm too old to audition. Would you want to audition so that I could get content? And I was like, sure. I mean, at first I said no, because I was like, no, I'm good. Like, that's not really my thing.
Right.
But then he was like, well, we can just go and it'll be fun to see the behind the scenes. We can laugh at all the bad singers. And and I had enough darkness in my heart to think that would be fun. And so we did that. Yeah.
Okay. So I think people now, because obviously American Idol is still around today, but I don't think, especially people younger than me, I don't think understand that show was a big deal, back then, and it was really the biggest show on TV at the time. And you went pretty far. I mean, you got to those final rounds. You were top 10, I believe, on that season of American Idol. So what I think many people would be interested to know, I mean, what was your experience on that show like? Because I think people are always fascinated by, what's it really like on these shows, how much of it is, production, how much of it is, was it actually just a real competition between you guys, and what was was it a positive experience for you, something that you were kind of glad to see end when it ended? What was the experience for you on that show?
Yeah, so American Idol at the time, I think our season was actually the highest rated American Idol season.
Right.
I think we averaged 35 million viewers per episode, which is insane when you think about, like, the biggest show on television right now would be like The Voice.
Right.
And I think it averages like 9 million.
Yeah.
So 4x, 4 times that.
Right.
And so it was a very, very big deal. This was back when it was still a machine. Like, there was the People magazine that did the American Idol full, edition every year.
Right.
So, like, there's a cover of People magazine floating around with Sligh on it, which is, which is crazy. And, it was just a big deal. And so, it was a little bit different. Like, making the top 10 on American Idol had real stakes because, the American Idol tour paid us a lot of money. So if you could make it to the top 10, you would make more money, than I made more money than I'd ever thought of in my life for the first time, and a lot of us got record deals, that was towards the end, about 2009, 2010 was where it sort of started, where only the winner or maybe the runner up would get a record deal. But back then, my season, I think 5 or 6 of the top 10 got record deals. Yeah. And it was a totally different thing. The competition was fine. Like American Idol is a little bit different than most reality shows, at least it was back then, where, they only had an hour.
Right.
And so, or an hour and a half or whatever. So when they would do the show, it was just top to bottom, just the real show. Yeah. And they didn't really film behind the scenes all that much. Like, they certainly didn't film us at our house, or our apartment and that kind of stuff. So it was fine. There definitely were politics, like the American Idol producers wanted to kind of say, this is the character that you are, and this is this is the kind of songs that you should sing because they'll connect with our audience.
Yeah.
And I would just go, I would have those conversations with the executive producers, like, you want me to sing this cheesy song? That isn't me, man. Like, that just isn't what I do. I was sort of, if you go down through the songs that I sang, in succession on the show, every one of those songs was a song that I would have done as an artist.
Right.
And so I think I just had different intent. I was trying to prove my artistry, and I don't think that most people in the American Idol world really care about that.
Yeah. I did some kind of, went back and watched a little bit because it's all on YouTube, as you can imagine, all of that stuff. And just so you know, in my family at the time, we were all about it. Our Tuesdays and Wednesdays scheduled around making sure we were home to watch. It was a big deal. We were one of the 30 something million that were watching every week. And I find that interesting that you talked about wanting to show your artistry and wanting to do those sorts of things, because there was a performance that you did, I think it was Endless Love, where you kind of changed up the arrangement of the song and you made it different, and the judges at the time really like got on you for it and were like, I don't like you changing this arrangement. And then like later on that same show, the guy who would be the runner-up later that year, Blake Lewis, he did the same thing to another song, but he was known to do that. I guess it's kind of what you were saying. They wanted everybody to have their thing. He had done that frequently, so he just did it again with some other song, and they were like, "Oh, this is great." And I was like, "Oh, poor Chris,"
Yeah, I think that the producers and the judges wanted me to be sort of the, I can do the sort of sweet crooner kind of thing. And I think that that's what they thought, for whatever reason, that was the TV character that I should play. But I was in a, not a hard rock band, but definitely a rock band.
Sure.
And so the idea of being a sweet crooner was just not something that I was interested in, unless it was for, I did Ray LaMontagne's Trouble, which is a bit of a crooning kind of song. But I did that because that song is just so incredibly well written, and, it's so emotional that I wanted to be able to have that in my repertoire also. Yeah. But the idea, the week that I did Endless Love, I did that. I arranged that. I arranged strings, I arranged the piano, I arranged everything. I had made a little demo. I had a little digital recorder, and I literally made a demo of that whole arrangement and brought it to the band. And it was super frustrating because I almost quit that week after the judges pooped on it because it really pissed me off, to be honest. I just was like, man, I just did something that so far, Chris Daughtry the year before had kind of rearranged some stuff, but never to that extent, where he had really taken a song that was one thing and made it a completely different thing. Yeah. And later on, Adam Lambert and even Blake, Blake had not really done that. Blake and I were really good friends on the show. Yeah. And that top 12 week where I did Endless Love, that was the first time he had done a rearrangement, and that was the first time I had done a rearrangement.
Oh, okay.
And we both kind of got pooped on for it in that first time. Mm-hmm. And so I was really frustrated by that. So anyway, it was a long time ago. It is what it is. Water on the bridge. I got a career out of it, so everything's good.
Sure. It all worked out in the end. You should have, to prove your hard rock style to them, your rock and roll style, you should have just told them you got kicked out of college for going to a Christian rock concert. They would have been sold. They would have been like, man, this guy.
A Christian pop.
Christian pop. Yeah. Well, maybe you should.
You're not hardcore unless you live hardcore, bro.
That's right. For him. So Vito, you mentioned the judges and they kind of got on you, got on Blake, and I think especially people now, American Idol has kind of taken a turn where, everybody's great and everything's, goes well on the show. But back then, Simon, his shtick was that he was just very blunt to people and would kind of just say things that made you drop your jaw. And a lot of people were fascinated by it then, and they're still talking about it to this day. And you see him on these other talent shows that he does now, where he's just like being so nice to people. It's like, man, that's not the Simon I grew up watching. I guarantee you that. Did you guys have any interaction with the judges behind the scenes? Did y'all kind of stay separate from them? And if you did have any, it's a two-part question. If you did have any contact with them, I mean, was he like that in particular all the time, or was he different backstage? If you had any interaction with him?
I think the year before I went on the show, there had been a whole like controversy with this guy named Corey something that supposedly had an affair. He claimed to have an affair with Paula Abdul.
Yep.
And so when I was on the show, of course they denied that it happened, and all that kind of stuff. But they really were very, very, very careful about the judges and the contestants having any contact outside of the show. And so, and also you got to think too, like, I mean, certainly season one, it was already a national, it was just a phenomenon. American Idol was. Yeah. But certainly by season 6, it was sort of entrenched that the judges were sort of the magic of the show, and the contestants were really important too. In fact, I think that was what made American Idol more like a better show than The Voice, is that there was always like the chance that somebody could be a superstar. Right. And in The Voice, it's all about the judges. The judges are the superstars. The contestants really don't matter. Yeah. And so I think with American Idol, yes, it was important, but at the same time, like the judges were the stars of the show. And so I think like they would show up literally while the theme music was playing is when they would be walked out to their table. Oh, yeah. And then while the theme music was playing at the end of the show, they were walked out. And so we really had no behind the scenes, I like after the show was over, when we were back in LA for the tour preparation, Paul Abdul had a birthday party that we all went to, but literally that was like the only time that I had hung out with Paula outside of the show. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure it's like you said, they had the situation a year before, and I didn't think about that. That would make sense that they were kind of saying, all right, you guys stay over here, you guys stay over here. I have one more Idol-related question, then we'll get into some of your music that you did afterwards. A couple very, very notable tunes that I want to ask you about. But I have to ask, you were on, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were on the same season as Sanjaya. And that kind of took on a life of its own, and he was kind of a phenomenon. There had never really been a contestant like him before, and it was kind of, he was getting voted through every week and had a fan base, and a lot of people thought that he shouldn't be there and all of that. And you talked about how they kind of wanted everybody to have their character and everything, and he certainly found his niche. Was there a little bit, because it was very clear that American Idol and their producers, like, they were in on it. Not saying they were like pulling the strings. I'm saying once the Sanjaya phenomenon caught on, they were clearly like, okay, we're going to play into this and kind of push him, have the girl crying, get the close up of her face. But he stayed a while, and there were some talented people that went home before him. Was anybody backstage like, come on, were any of the other contestants saying like, bro, like we got people going home that should be here, and this guy's sticking around and it's almost a joke? Was anybody like rubbed the wrong way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people were probably rubbed the wrong way, but I think that, what you guys can see is that Sanjaya was this very, very, very sweet, innocent kid who was, it wasn't his fault that people were voting for him. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think,
kudos to him.
I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that Sanjaya was just the sort of, every year on American Idol back then, there was always that cute kid that made it further than he should because 12 to 15-year-old girls were voting for him. The year before, I think, or 2 years before, Kevin Kovacs had made it way further than anyone expected him to.
Yeah.
I don't think he made it as far as Sanjaya, but, he made it further than anybody had expected him to.
Yeah.
And, so I think that all this sort of like, I think it was frustrating to go home before Sanjaya for me. I went home before Sanjaya. My friend Gina Glockton went home before Sanjaya.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that Sanjaya was better than us? Obviously not. I don't think Sanjaya. But once you sort of wrap your head around the idea that American Idol is not necessarily about who's best, it's about who's best for TV and what people are responding to in the moment on TV. And it really is a momentary thing because there's, they could only vote for 2 hours after the show.
Right.
And so it really is a momentary thing. And, and the American Idol producers definitely played into it, you knew that if you were, there were 12 contestants and you went sixth, that you were being buried so that people would forget about you by the time you got to the end. Wow. You wanted to be, people would, and a lot of times people would tune in for the first 20 minutes of the show, 30 minutes of the show, and then tune back in for the last 15, 20 minutes. Yep. So you want to be one of the first 2 or 3 and one of the last 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. And so Sanjaya was always one of the first 2 or 3 or one of the last 2 or 3. Yeah. And I think because the producers knew that, they were playing to a, and it is what it is. But yeah, I never had anything against Sanjaya. I thought Sanjaya was an awesome guy.
Sure.
And a fun guy and really just sweet and cool. So I'm really glad that he was a part of what we got to do there.
Sure. I think that one thing that made that so unique is that you could even tell just viewing at home, he was such a sweet, innocent person and just so it seemed like he was the one who was oblivious to the fact of all of this phenomenon. He was just trying to get to the next week on American Idol, and I think that's what made a lot of people flock to him, was just such a genuine personality on the show. Sure. So after Idol, you get eliminated, you do the tour. Did you, obviously you had a history in the church and leading worship. Was it kind of your intention to kind of go back into the Christian music world? Did you kind of try to go to other genres, or was it always kind of, I want to go, make my name in Christian music?
Well, no, actually, my plan originally was my band, and I was going to go back to my band, and we had a record deal offer, a standing offer waiting for us by a major label. Mm-hmm. And then as I began to have conversations with the labels after I got off the show, I came to they were just like, hey, all the marketing money is with Chris Sligh. Like the idea of us signing Half Past Forever and then trying to figure out how to sell Half Past Forever when we can just sell Chris Sligh doesn't really make sense. And so I think that if it had worked out for my band to get signed, I would have signed the deal with a major label on the mainstream side. Yeah. And so I was just in this weird position where I then was sort of questioning, what do I do as a solo act? Because I'd been in a band for so long that the idea of being a solo artist had never really occurred to me until that moment, like literally that moment. Yeah. And so I was like, man, I'm already going to be uncomfortable. Like, what are the kinds of songs that I wanted to write? And so, like, I was meeting with, one major label, and they were like, oh, we see you as, like, the next Jack Johnson. And I was like, well, that's not me. Like, I'm in a rock band. Like, and then it was like, I really wanted to be able to make the kind of music that I was making at the time with my band, which was, the way that one record executive described us was, it's, the balls of Foo Fighters with the spirituality and etherealness of U2. Yeah. So it was like big old, like, rhythm guitars and then kind of twinkly synths and, layers and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so we had a thing that I thought was relatively unique. And And so then I was like, well, that's what I want to do. That's the kind of music that I love writing. And the genre that my sort of thing fit best in just felt like it was Christian music. And having grown up in the church and but when I signed my deal, I signed with a label that my first record was half sort of CCM type songs and half mainstream radio songs.
Yeah.
And the promise that was made to me was that we were going to go to mainstream radio with these songs in the same way that if I signed a major label deal. But we went to Christian radio first, and my first song did so incredibly well at Christian radio that then the label was like, well, we're not going to do the other stuff because it doesn't really make sense to go and spend $500,000 at radio trying to get a hit when this is where the traction is, you know?
Yeah.
So I was relatively frustrated with that. In fact, I ended up leaving that first label because of, you know, sort of the broken trust, I think, because of that. And, but yeah, you know, I was sort of never really comfortable with being fully in the Christian genre because I didn't feel like that was me, but I just felt like that was the closest thing to me rather than going and trying to be the next Jack Johnson, you know?
Yeah. So you've made a big splash in the Christian music world. You said your first song was a huge hit. Now, which song was because you had 4 or 5 that were really big. What was the first?
The first song that I released was a song called Empty Me.
Yes.
And,
okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it ended up being one of the biggest songs in Christian music of 2008 and one of the biggest songs in Christian music of 2009. It was a song, I think it was on the charts for like 80 something weeks straight.
Yes.
And so it was like one of those songs that just lasted forever and it actually hurt the rest of my songs, you know, like, you know, it hurt like the ability for us to go to radio. Like when we went to radio with my second single, I mean, I think it was over a year later, we finally went with the second single. Like radio stations were still so huge on Empty Me that they wouldn't play the second single. And so that was pretty frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you my 14-year-old self, I had my MP3 player and I had Empty Me on the MP3 player. And I still love that song. I wrote on your wall, Facebook wall weeks ago, there's a church in my hometown. I'm driving the other night and their sign is lit up and it says, "Lord, empty me of me so I can be filled with you." And I was like, "That's Chris Sligh. It's a Chris Sligh song." So I took a picture of it, put it on your wall. I still think that song's really, really strong. I couldn't remember if it was your first. I knew it was your biggest song. I didn't know if it was the first one. So that's kind of a double-edged sword, though, right? When your first one is such a huge hit, it's what do you do to follow it? You know, I would imagine that's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we still had other, you know, I think I had 6 top 20 hits as an artist, which, you know, is nothing to sniff at.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, you know, we felt like we had multiple huge songs on that record. And, you know, and also we felt like we had mainstream hits on that record, you know, and looking back, I think that if we had actually gone after radio, I think that we had the possibility for at least, there was a song called Let You Know that was one of my favorite songs still that I've ever written. Mm-hmm. And I feel like looking back at radio during that time period, it would have fit in very, very nicely. Yeah. But, you know, things work out the way that they work out. Yeah. And ultimately, you know, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. And and so I ended up going and making a second record, had moved up to a major label. I was signed to Warner Brothers in this little company called Brass Records. And then I signed to Warner Brothers and a major Christian label called Word. And so we did the second record called The Anatomy of Broken, and I'm still very, very proud of that record. Yeah. And and then I left the music business for 8.5 years.
Yeah, I just had a writing session at Word a few weeks ago. That is it's a cool place to write. It's very cool to be at that area there in Nashville, and it can be overwhelming. I mean, it can be really overwhelming. So you had Empty Me, you had all these hits of Christian music, but at some point you co-write a song called Here Comes Goodbye, which ultimately gets cut by Rascal Flatts, which they're still a household name to this day, but even then they were at the tippy top of country music. What was the songwriter in me wants to just is fascinated by, when you write a hit like that, what do you remember about writing that song? How soon was it after you guys wrote it that they got their hands on it? Was it something you had written a long time ago that just kind of came up again? What was the story behind that song?
So Clint Lagerberg, who I wrote that with, he was actually the guy that, so on Empty Me, my first single as an artist, I had written the lyric and music with this guy named Tony Wood. Mm-hmm. And Tony Wood's in Christian music, I think he has 55 number one songs or something stupid. It's crazy. But Tony and I had written it, and I knew that as soon as we wrote it, that the lyric was great, but that the music wasn't right. Mm-hmm. And so I took it to this guy that was a new friend of mine. I don't even think that we had written together before, but he had come highly recommended. Everybody was like, hey, you need to meet this guy named Clint Lagerberg. And so I brought Empty Me into him, and I said, hey, man, would you help me, rewrite the music on this? And if we get it right, it's going to be my first single, because I knew that this was going to be my first single if we got it right. And we ended up, Clint helped me write the music to Empty Me. And so we took this lyric that Tony and I had written together, and then ended up writing the music. Well, maybe a month later, we got back together, and he was like, hey, man, would you want to write? Because my record was done, and so I wasn't really interested in writing more for myself. Yeah. He's like, hey, have you ever thought about writing country music? And I was like, not really. I'm not really a country guy. And at the time, I was definitely not a country guy. And so he was like, well, Rascal Flatts is sort of a pop country. And at the time, they were sort of the only pop country act. Right. And he was like, I think we could write something really cool that uses your melodic sensibility, but we just write something that really fits Flatts. So I said, cool. So he had this dream of writing a song for Flatts. So he had a whole title list just for Rascal Flatts. Yeah. And so he read off a few titles, and he read off the title, Here Comes Goodbye. And I said, oh, that could be interesting. I was like, I hear that being a breakup song. Mm-hmm. So then we started talking about our worst breakups. And I told my story of the girl that I dated before I met my wife. And that whole story was just a mess. Well, then he starts telling his story about the girl that he had dated before he met his wife. And he was living in Maine at the time, where he grew up. And in Maine, they didn't have air conditioning, because you don't really need air conditioning up there all that much. Yeah. And so you would keep your windows down during the summer. And they had, the way he described his living room was really unique. And so he heard truck tires coming up, and he lived at the end of a long gravel road. That was his driveway. And so he heard truck tires coming up the gravel road. He looks out the window. It's this girl. She's driving up with the windows down and no music playing, which was really weird. Mm-hmm. Then she comes up to the front door and knocks instead of just coming right in. Yeah. And I literally was like, Clint, I think that's our first verse. Yeah. And so we ended up writing, I could hear the truck tires coming up the gravel road. It's not like her to drive that slow with nothing on the radio. And so we ended up writing the verse and chorus and bridge really quickly. Mm-hmm. And maybe an hour. And then he had gone down to check on his daughter, who was 3 or 4 at the time. And she was taking a nap. And while he was down, I began to play on the piano this little riff that I had literally for almost 2 years. And I thought it was going to be a Chris Sligh song. So I played. He comes running back up the stairs, and he's like, hey, what was that? And I was like, oh, I think that, it's just a thing that I have that eventually I want to write. Mm-hmm. He was like, I think that might be this song. And I was like, oh, really? And so then I go, I can hear the truck tires coming up the gravel road. And it's not like girl to drive that slow with nothing on the radio. And I was like, yeah, I think this is that song.
Yeah.
So we ended up like taking the rest of the session to sort of rewrite. We had written a completely different musical sort of approach. And then after we wrote this thing, it became informed by, you know, what we were going to write. And so, you know, and we made all these little accidental choices, you know, like the verse ends on a 4.
Yep.
And so our chorus, you know, like the new way that the music went, it ended on a 4. Well, our original chorus had gone to a 4. And so we ended up replacing it with a 2 minor at the beginning of the chorus.
Yeah.
Because that felt better going, here comes goodbye. Felt better than ending on a 2. You know, like that's one of the tricks that we play, right, as songwriters. Yep. Like you switch out chords when, you know, you don't want to repeat the same chord, so you switch out chords. You have to figure out where it sounds the best. Yep. So we ended up putting the 2 minor as the first chord of the chorus, which is a very interesting choice that I don't think we realized that we were making at the time.
Yeah.
We weren't making it because it was interesting. We just did it because we wanted an F.
Exactly.
And then, you know, we couldn't do an F because we'd ended the verse on an F, so we needed to go to something else, and we went to D minor.
Right.
And then walked up, and, you know, like there's all these chord changes that feel like they're so like unique and different that were really almost all of them were accidental. Like I accidentally went to the flat 7 at one point, and he was like, oh, I like that, what's that? And so then we tweaked the melody to go to the flat 7. And then it goes back to the 2 minor 7, which is an interesting movement. So in the key of C, you know, you're going from B flat major to D minor 7, which is a very unique progression within that key. And so it ended up being just a very unique song without us meaning for it to be a very unique song musically. And so we ended up not having time to write the second verse. So I went home, and then Clint emailed me later that night, and he goes, hey man, I was thinking about this all day long, and I think I wrote a second verse. Tell me what you think about this. So he just texted me like the second verse, which I think is brilliant. I think it's one of the best second verses ever written, and I can say that because I had nothing to do with it. So he's like, you know, and I can hear her say I love you like it was yesterday, and I can see it written on her face that she had never felt that way. One day I thought I'd see her with her daddy by her side, and violins would play, here comes the bride, but here comes goodbye. Yeah. And I was like, oh gosh, like that's freaking great, man. And he's like, yeah, we don't have to keep it. Like we could get together, because we planned on getting together the next afternoon to finish the song. And I was like, dude, I do not need to drive all the way out to your house just for us to land on that this is the best second verse ever written in the history of music. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I was just like, yeah, man. So then I had played the piano down for the demo, and he said, well, hey, I know that you were going to sing on this demo, but I'm writing with this guy named Sean McConnell tomorrow. What would you think about having him sing? And Sean, if you don't know Sean McConnell, you should check him out. He's unreal. He's one of the greatest vocalists in Nashville. And so I had heard Sean before, and I was like, heck yes. Yeah. Get him to sing on it. It's going to be amazing. So Sean sang on the demo, and it's one of, in my opinion, one of the best demos I've ever heard. It's just piano vocal. Sean sings the living crap out of it. Yeah. And so he came in an hour early to his session, showed up at 9:00 in the morning, sang Here Comes Goodbye. And then by 10:30, he was on hold with flats.
Wow.
Yeah.
Doesn't usually go that quick, right?
No. Now, it did take a full year before it ended up getting cut.
Right.
So, but the label put it on hold. And if you know anything about like the biggest artists, A&R is not really all that important for, I didn't know this at the time, but like A&R is not really that important for the big artists. Like Keith Urban, he makes those records and chooses those songs with his team and with his producer, you know, it's him and Dan, or whoever he's working with. Those songs, A&R has very little to do with it. So, but A&R would put a song on hold, and And then it just was sitting there. Well, we ended up getting like another like 70 something holds on that song. Like we had Carrie Underwood wanted to record it. Keith Urban wanted to record it. I mean, everybody in town wanted to record it. And so after like a year, we were just going like, what is going on with the song? This song has to be something, you know, like there's something with the song. And so my publisher was at an ASCAP event, like a Christian ASCAP event where Dan Huff was being honored for like lifetime achievement or something. And she was just like, she knew that he was producing Flats. She literally like bum rushed the stage as he came off the stage from receiving this award and was like, hey, you've got a song with Rascal Flats that one of my writers wrote. Like, can you just take it off hold if you're not going to use it, or would you record it? And he was like, what song are you talking about? So it's called Here Comes Goodbye. And he was like, I've never heard that song. And so she was like, can I send it? So she literally that night sent it to him. And literally that was on, I think, a Friday night that she did that. And by 2 weeks from that Friday, it was at radio.
Wow. Jeez.
So they recorded it.
It was their first single off that album.
It was the first single off of Unstoppable. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it just ended up being, you know, it's like very, very fast, then lots of waiting, and then very, very fast.
Yeah.
And also they were in a dispute with their label at the time, where they were trying to, basically they had said, you know, this is our last album. Unstoppable was their last album with Lyric Street. And so this was their last album. So they basically told the label, you have 6 months to run as many singles as possible up the charts. Yeah. So, you know, do what you will with that time period. And then we're releasing a greatest hits, and then we're signing at Big Machine. So they literally, I think from the time that song went to radio to when it was off radio, it was 13 weeks.
Yeah. Wow.
Which nowadays, you know, it takes about 35 to 40 weeks to get up the charts.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a very interesting sort of thing. So it was like a lot of waiting, and then really, really fast, and then it was over.
Wow. There you go, folks. The full story behind hit song for Rascal Flatts, and what the music video that they ended up doing later on was one of those. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was one where it was like rip your heart out and stomp on it. I remember like the snow and stuff that they had. It was remarkable.
Yeah, they made it about death somehow, which I'm not really sure why they did that. But
it was not what I was expecting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you, like you said, you took a lot of time off, personal reasons. And anybody that has followed you on any kind of social media knows the story there. You just made a big post recently about how you had stopped writing. You had stopped, you know, doing all that stuff. There were other personal reasons why. But recently you got back into writing again, and I would imagine that's got to be a rewarding thing after feeling like you were done, right? For a while, feeling like that was a part of your life that was behind you. I guess to kind of maybe re-find that joy that you got from writing. I mean, how beneficial, how rewarding has that been to get back into writing and things like that?
Yeah, well, I left in March of 2011. I left Nashville, and I went and worked in church world for several years. Worked as a worship pastor first, and then as a creative director, and worked at a couple of the biggest churches in America. And in 2017, I came back down to Nashville because I thought I'm originally from right outside of Nashville, a little town called Springfield. And so I came back to town thinking that I was moving back for 6 months before I would go take another job at a church. And so after 6 months of sort of sitting around waiting to heal and doing some work to heal from, I had been in a really bad situation at a church in Chicago. Yeah. And so we got to the end of it, and I was ready to take another job. My wife was like, I just don't think we're supposed to leave Nashville yet. And I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. You know, I was, you know, late 30s, early 40s or whatever, and trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up, which is not a good place to be. And so I did some touring again. Like in 2018, I did 85 shows and Got to the end of 2018, and I literally was just like, man, there's no way I could do this every year for the rest of my life. Like, like just the booking of the shows was exhausting, and then playing the shows and booking shows while you're on the road and doing that whole thing. It just was, honestly, it was probably the most burnt out that I've ever been. Like, it was very, very exhausting.
Right.
And also just the booking thing is just not, like, some people really love that side of things. It was not the thing that was fun for me. Mm-hmm. I loved the playing of the shows, but then I didn't love the travel. So anyway, it was a whole thing. So coming into 2019, I literally was just like, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know what's next for me. And you have to understand, like, from 99 when I started writing until 2011, I had written probably 2,500 songs, and then between 2011 and 2019, I had written maybe 15 songs. And so songwriting was just not the thing that I got creative juices from. And so I had a guy that had reached out to me several times because of Here Comes Goodbye. He was an artist that was living in California, but he was starting to get some traction here in Nashville. And he would reach out to me every time he came into Nashville to write. He was just like, hey, man, I want to write with you. Hey, man, I want to write with you. He did this 6 times. Mm-hmm. And finally, on the 6th time, I was like, I'm just going to write with this guy because he's going to keep annoying me until I do. And so we wrote, ended up being a really good experience. And he was like, hey, man, you're really good at this. You should think about doing this again. It's crazy that you don't write. Like, it's just crazy that you don't write. And I was like, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. But, I think that time in my life is done. So that was March of 2019. And then the next month I was working on, I kept producing. I'm a producer and I produce other artists and always have. Even when I was working at churches, I was constantly producing artists and helping them figure out their sound and all that kind of stuff. And I had helped an artist finish a couple of songs that he was working on. And then we wrote one from scratch, which, was rare for me, with a co-writer in town. And at the end of the session, she was like, hey, you're really good at this. You should do this. Like, it's crazy that you're not, like, almost word for word what my friend had told me. And so I just started thinking about it. So from April until June, I just really started processing through, like, okay, so what would it look like for me to come back to the music industry? Because I had left and I thought I was never coming back. Yeah. And I'd been gone, in the music business, 8.5 years is not an insignificant amount of time. That's a very, very long time in this business. Right. And so I really had the question of just like, man, I guess the question is, can I be good enough? Because being good at something isn't good enough in this business. Like, you have to be great. You have to be unique. You have to be able to be the best at something to really make a career. And, you can get a pub deal. You can get a record deal. You can get deals. But, like, I'm not really interested. I don't know if you're into the Enneagram stuff, but, like, I'm an Enneagram 8, wing 7. And, as an 8, I'm pretty ambitious. Yep. And 8.5 years of therapy has helped me learn how to be healthy in that ambition. Right. But, like, I'm still ambitious. The idea, if I'm going to do something, I'm doing it because I want to win at it. I'm uber competitive. I was a basketball player for most of my, childhood, and was very good at it, very competitive, and so how do I be competitive at what I'm doing while keeping my integrity? How do I do this well enough to be good? Can I get good enough again? Because, I haven't written in 8.5 years. These are the questions that I'm asking myself. And so I ended up taking April to June and just sort of like processing it. And I do these really analytical breakdowns of songs. That's one of the things that I think conservatory level education, music education sort of helped me with. But I just went through the last 3 years from 2017, 18, and 19, and 2016. So 16, 17, 18, and 19. I went through every number one song and broke down chord progression, melodic structure, all that stuff, so I could understand what was happening in country music. Sure. And I knew that I didn't want to write Christian music again. That sort of season of my life was done. So if I'm going to be in Nashville, which is my wife wanted to stay in Nashville, then I had to figure out if I could write country music. That was really sort of the thing. And like I mentioned before, I was never really like a country guy. That wasn't what I grew up listening to.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out if I could love it. And, I listened only to country music for 3 months and slowly fell in love with what was happening in country music. So then I went to my wife in June and just said, hey, what would you think about me being a writer again? And she was like, would you be an artist? And I was like, I mean, I might release music, but no, not like at the same level. Just be like, hey, I love this song. I think I'm going to put it out kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she was like, as long as you're not on the road 200 days a year, then yes.
Yeah.
Great. And so then, let's see.
You disappeared.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
I just got a phone.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was from June until September of 2019. I just solo wrote a bunch of songs and produced a bunch of demos, trying to get them to sound as much like the radio as I could.
Yeah.
Because I never really produced in country music before. And then I started co-writing in September 2019, so 2 years ago now.
Wow.
A little over 2 years ago now. And so it's been this crazy experience. I started off with 0 co-writers, 0 clients outside of Nate, who at the time lived in California.
Yeah.
Now Nate blew up on TikTok last year and signed a pub deal with Sony ATV and signed a record deal with Sony, and he's blowing up, and I've got singles coming out with him, which is crazy that first co-write ended up being so productive. But at the time, like I literally had no co-writers, and so I would just go to writers rounds and begin to just go up to people and be like, hey, I wrote Here Comes Goodbye, and I think what you do is really cool. I'd love to write with you,
Yeah.
And so just slowly, my first, in 2019, I think I did 21 writing sessions, and I was so proud of, from September to December, I did 21 writing sessions.
Jeez.
And then last year I think I did 180 writing sessions in 2020. And then this year so far, I've already done 248 or something.
Good grief. Wow.
Yeah, so it's been, the production clientele has just today I had 2 songs that I wrote came out, and one of them I produced. I've got a couple of major label artists that I'm producing now and writing with. And so, dude, it's been a slow grind, but it's been hard work. But here we are, and lots of stuff is starting to happen. I've got some of the biggest unsigned pop TikTok acts that I'm working with and producing. And so that's really, really cool. And man, it's been a ride, man. That's been really, really interesting to be a part of.
That's awesome. I got some rapid fire questions for you. I got some questions in, some of them relating to Idol, some of them not. The first one is, do you keep in touch with anyone that you were on Idol with?
Yeah, Phil Stacey and I are really close. Blake Lewis and I probably talk 4 or 5 times a year. Chris Richardson, we keep up with each other on social media. Gina Glockson, we keep up on social media. Sanjaya every now and again will pop his head up. I think every now we have a group text that we have with all of us in it, where every now and then we'll, a flurry of something. Like Jordan Sparks had a single come out recently, and there was like a whole flurry of activity talking about that. Yeah. During the pandemic, we were going to do this thing where we were going to do a song, a cover of a song with all the top 10 from that season, and it ended up not working out because Sanjaya never sent us his stuff, so
it just wouldn't work without him, like you can't.
No, you can't do the top 10 without all 10 of them,
Yeah. Well, ironically, you brought up Phil Stacey. He was one of my favorites that year as well. I always loved his voice. He's got such a great tone to his voice. Somebody asked, they just put it bluntly, were you upset that you didn't win?
Me?
Yeah.
No. I was actually relieved that I tell people the day that I went home on American Idol was the happiest day of my life.
Yeah.
Now I think it's been beat now. My daughter being born probably beats it. You know, my son being born, that beats it. Right. But honestly, it was like, I don't think people understand, you know, American Idol is this thing that it is so boring, man. Like, it is so boring and yet so like mentally exhausting that, like, because they have all these fairness rules. And so like you would leave at, like, if someone had a voice lesson at 7:00 in the morning, everyone had to leave at 7:00 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
And if somebody had a voice lesson at 11:00 at night, everyone had to stay till 11:00 at night.
Oh.
And we were in these, you know, we were in a TV studio. And so this is like pre-Wi-Fi. So there was only wired internet.
Oh, no.
This is pre-smartphones. So there's no, like, we didn't, you know, I had a flip phone, you know, that was like my phone. And so I would call people sometimes, but, you know, then there's a 3-hour time difference between there and home.
Yep.
You know, I would get on for my time on the wired internet. You know, we each took turns getting on the wired internet because there was only 2 cables that you could use for all, you know, at the time, 24 of us, then 16, then 12, and so on and so forth. And, or 24, 20, 16, 12. So, you know, it was a lot of like waiting around and doing nothing while at the same time being in this very like pressure cooker environment. And so like, but the day that I got voted off it was like a relief, to be honest. Yeah. I was glad that I made the top 10 because I was able to do the tour and make the money. But I knew I had a record deal, you know, and I know that some people aren't afforded that, you know, and that's, I was really, really blessed and privileged to be able to have a deal waiting for me. And so I wasn't worried about getting a deal at that point. So yeah, man, like when I got voted off, it was actually like, you know, a very, very good day. I remember my wife happened to be in town the night that I was voted off, and it was unexpected because the week before I had been like number 2 on, you know, on the amount of votes gotten.
Yeah.
And so, like, it was very, very unexpected for me to go home. My wife just happened to be in town, and we had the greatest morning sex the next day that you could ever imagine.
I mean, I thought that sentence was going this way, and then it just took a hard turn.
There you go. Secrets of American Idol.
There you go. That's the true story of American Idol. Last question. This may be really random. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Somebody said, with Will Owsley working on your first record, how did that come about?
Will, okay, so I had gotten asked by this guy named Kevin Max, who was in a band called DC Talk, which is a huge Christian band. Kevin, I had sung a DC Talk song. It's a really funny story. Like, I had planned on being the first American Idol to sing an original on American Idol.
Yeah.
And that had been the plan for, I think it was top 16 week.
Yep.
That had been the plan for 3 weeks, was I was going to do an original song on American Idol. And literally 2 days before the show, they came and said, hey, we're not letting you do the original song after all.
What a bummer.
And so you've got to pick a song. Well, all of the songs that I had tried to get cleared had either not cleared, or people had, or someone else had already chosen it. Mm-hmm. And so I was really stuck. I literally had like, and I just put a DC Talk song on there as like, it was like the 30th song down.
Yeah.
But it was literally like the only song that had cleared that I had time to get it. So we tried to clear another couple of songs, but I ended up singing, this DC Talk song on American Idol. Well, that connected me with the Toby and Michael and Kevin, who were, I loved DC Talk as a kid. So that was really, really cool. Well, Kevin at the time was making this project that Will Owsley was producing. And so he asked me to be a part of this project. Well, so we came into Nashville on the American Idol tour, and I got picked up from the studio at like 8 o'clock in the morning. They took me over, from the hotel at 8 o'clock in the morning. They took me over to Will Owsley's studio. I recorded vocals on this song, and and then we went to lunch, and then I went back to tour, and it was what it was. Mm-hmm. Well, Will and I began to text back and forth as we were talking about this vocal and stuff, and just became good friends. Like, I just liked his musical sensibilities. And Will had been in a band called Owsley that, if you go back and listen to those records, they're unreal. Yeah. Like, for like power pop kind of stuff in the mid to late 90s. There was nothing as good as Will, in my opinion, as good as Owsley. And he had signed 2 of the biggest record deals ever in the history of music. Like, that's how big and that's how powerful Owsley was. Mm-hmm. And, things had kind of fallen apart by the time that I'd gotten to him. He was going through a really messy divorce and had kids, and it was a real mess. And he was really struggling to find his place in the music business and really trying to figure out what was next for him. And, it was like he played guitar for Amy Grant, but Owsley had the band had sort of wasn't able to do what they wanted to do anymore. And it was really, really sad, because a couple of years later, Will ended up taking his own life. And it was really, it was really, really hard, because if you knew Will, you knew that he was literally one of the most talented people that you could ever imagine. But it was like one of those people, and we all know those people, that is like, they could just never quite put the pieces together to make it all work. And for him to feel like that his only way out was to kill himself was really, really, really difficult. Yeah. So anyway, I'm really grateful that I got to know Will when I did. It was very, very sad and heartbreaking that it ended the way it did. But I'm really glad that he got to worked on 3 songs with me on my first record.
Yeah. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the channel today. It was great having you on, and we'll be looking out for some of your music that you've written and that you're going to put out yourself. Everybody, go follow Chris Sligh on all of the social media platforms and all of that stuff. And absolutely, his old music, you can go listen to that. It's available everywhere. New music, all that stuff. Chris, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
All right. Thanks so much, Brad. Have a great day.
Thanks.